Hello there. What is going on, everyone? Today we're going to talk about an idea that I have been floating around a little bit amongst communities for a proposed rules change for how scoring works in Star Wars Armada. It's just an idea. I'm not trying to say that the game should get this rule change. I think it's something that is worth discussing. I think it's worth something that maybe belongs in the conversation, especially as we go past 2025 and potentially into times where maybe there will be some community rules changes at some point. Maybe it's something that should be discussed and considered and talked about a little bit. And I want to get some of your guys' feedback on it as well. And it boils down to scoring and how the Super Star Destroyer has the half points scoring rule. If you guys are new here to the channel, make sure you are entered to win the 12 Days of Life Day. We are doing 12 giveaways all throughout December. If you want to have a chance to enter to win any of those giveaways, you just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. So plus we talk a lot about Star Wars and tabletop games and sci-fi games and Armada and other games like that as well. So I'd love to have you stick around and keep the discussion going. Plus links for our Discord and other stuff are in the video description below as well. So a little history. The Super Star Destroyer came out a couple of years ago, and with it was a new class of ship, the huge ship. It was the only huge ship ever to get released for Star Wars Armada, and there was a new rule, well, a host of new rules, but amongst it was the half points rule. And that basically stated that if at the end of the game, when counting up points, if the Super Star Destroyer had half of its hull value in damage cards assigned to it, then the opponent would get half points for that. So in a 22 health version of this ship, you would only have to get 11 damage on it in order to be able to score half points. And that has been an interesting thing with it, because it's not actually that hard to get 11 damage on the Super Star Destroyer. And so it means a lot of times when you run it, you do end up having, it's so big, the target takes up so much of the board, and it ends up not being that hard for your opponent to have all of their ships be able to have, bring their guns to bear on the Super Star Destroyer. It's also so large that it's not hard for most ships to have double arc on the Super Star Destroyer. It's also it's got a fixed amount of shields. It's got a lot of shields, but again, over repeated fire, and that's usually one of the only high value targets on the board. Everybody's shooting at it constantly. Squadrons have no problem getting into range of it, so it ends up taking a lot of fire. It doesn't always die, although it can be completely removed from gameplay. But to get half points off of this thing usually is not that hard. And in a competitive environment, a lot of times, even if you don't table somebody, getting over 100 points without even having to kill a ship is a big deal, and that can be more than the other person would get from objectives. That can be usually a difference maker. So it's a very big deal to get half points off of a ship like this. And if we want to fast forward to towards like Wave 8, and then ships like the Starhawk coming out, that while it had less hull than this, at only 14 hull, at only like 140 or 150 points. It was a much smaller ship. It was only a large ship, but ended up being infinitely tankier, and since it wasn't a huge ship, it didn't give half points. Therein lies my proposed rule consideration, and that would be, I say, what happens if we do half points for all ships? Why should huge ships be the only ones that offer half points? They're already bigger. They already have a bigger base than everything else. They already have easier to double arc. They already can't take anything that adds adds an upgrade slot. As of right now, it's only the Super Star Destroyer. They have no way of getting defensive retrofit. They don't have defensive tech. Even somebody like Mahdi doesn't do anything to the Super Star Destroyer. So they again, I think that half points rule was put in at a time where it seemed reasonable, but then there's Wave 8 came out, and then we've gotten it can become a lot easier. You can have basically a tankier ISD, you can have a tankier regular Star Destroyer. If you put Mahdi on there and you have defensive retrofits, it can be a lot harder, to get points off of other large ships, for example, than off of a Super Star Destroyer. And so it kind of changes the balance. And I think it's highlighted with the Starhawk. Here's a ship that has titles that give it extra defense tokens. It's already starting with great defense tokens. It usually is going to have at least 5, if not 6, with a gate. A gate is definitely a big part of the conversation, but a gate isn't the entire conversation, because a Starhawk is already a very tanky ship. 14 hull is the highest threshold to score in the game. And what I mean by that is, even as SSD has more hull, but you only have to get 11 points on there to score. Well, I guess maybe in a 400-point game, I should clarify that in a 400-point game, it's the highest threshold, because the epic versions of the SSD would be a higher threshold to score. So, in a competitive 400-point game, it's, Starhawk has become sort of a mainstay for, I don't want to give up any points to my opponent, and I want to be able to farm objective points. There's a whole genre of fleets called Farm Hawk, and it's kind of because of this. And I think, well, if a Starhawk got half points, but why would it only be the Starhawk? Because if the Starhawk got half points, then that genre would just switch to the next tankiest ship, and that might be an ISD-2 that's kind of geared up. It could be an MC-30 with double defensive retrofit, potentially. They could even, could be other types of ships as well. So there's a lot of, I've seen interdictors that are very, very tanky, especially with high engineering values. So it's definitely something to consider, that if every ship gave you half points for having half of their hull, I would say half rounded up. So if you have 9 hull, you need 5 damage to do it. But again, if it ever went into play testing or something like that, that could be details that get ironed out. Like, well, what feels a little bit better? Half rounded up, half rounded down, so on and so forth. Now, where does this idea kind of fall short? Well, this can potentially hurt smaller ships that want to get away. And of course, that makes sense. I guess that maybe that's the point of it too, is somebody who manages to, take some damage and then flies away. It might be thematic, but this isn't really a narrative game. This is a combat game. Maybe it's a good excuse for that CR90 to just stay in the fight and, do a concentrate fire on that last round and, try and go down in flames and maybe score some points on the other hand, because it also gives that small ship, hey, I don't have to blow up that Star Destroyer, but if I can get like 2 or 3 more damage on there, then I'm going to get at least half points. It gives a lot of fleets a fighting chance against these impenetrable walls. And one of the biggest reasons why I think this is a good idea is that Armada is a game that is only 6 turns. It's only 6 turns, and a lot of times, especially in a Starhawk, and a Gate Starhawk even more so, you just don't always have the rounds. You just mathematically may not have enough dice to be able to possibly bring it down, even if you rolled perfect. This is especially true if your opponent starts out, very far from you, and he starts out at speed 1. You'll lose multiple turns just trying to get into firing range, and then you may only have 4 turns of shooting, and then you have to hope that your shooting goes well, and you have to hope that you don't lose anybody in the process. It's also a problem with slow play. Now, this is more of a tournament thing, but I have certainly seen it where people will have a very tanky ship and play slow deliberately, because if they can make the time expire without getting to round 6, because maybe you had just enough firepower to maybe kill it on turn 6. So if they can make sure they play slow to where the game wraps up, time is called on round 4 or 5 even, then that guarantees that they won't give you any points. But you'd have a really hard time trying to stop the half points that way. So again, I think a half points rule would serve a lot of purposes, but it would also have to apply to small and medium ships as well. Now, the interesting take on that is that if it applies to small ships, keep in mind that also applies to your opponent's small ships. That means that little Gazanti that kept scattering, you happen to ram it twice, so even though it's gonna escape and be okay, you're still gonna get half points off of it. Now, that's not a lot of points, but that could be a difference maker. It could definitely influence things, and I think a rules change like that would have a lot of those type of influence. You might see an uptick in ramming that could also lead to some negatives in gameplay early on. When the game was very young, and there were some upgrades and some combinations that kind of really favored a fleet that would do nothing but ram you over and over again, and that wasn't fun. So I don't want to necessarily promote a change that's going to make the game become more toxic, and I don't know if that would really do that. I think it would actually lead to more people being less afraid to engage. Because one of the big problems you have right now is that you look at a big ship and you're like, well, there's no point in me even firing a shot at that ship. And that happens far too often, I think, these days. And so I would like to see some incentive, points-wise and scoring-wise, to actually, engage with a ship, even if you can't kill it. Do some damage, get your half points, and have fun while doing it. Any opportunity to throw more dice, is worth exploring at the very least. But that's what I think. I want to hear what you guys think. What do you think about the half points rule as it is now? What do you think of my suggestion to make all ships use the same half points rule that huge ships have in Star Wars Armada? I think it's sort of a no-brainer for the Starhawk. I think the Starhawk is still a good ship and would still get taken because, hey, yeah, maybe you get half points of my Starhawk. Well, but you're not going to kill it. It's still on the board, and it can still... Maybe that means I'm going to actually use the Starhawk as a flagship that's probably still not going to die and might give you some points, but that's okay if you get some points. Maybe everybody gets a little bit of points and we have a good time. Those are some of my thoughts. I want to hear what you think down in the comments section below. It's okay if you disagree. We're definitely entitled to disagree. Maybe you think it's a good idea. Maybe you have a different suggestion altogether. I'd love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments section below. Or you can also jump in our Discord and keep the discussion going over there. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Big thanks to my patrons. You guys are out of this world. Hopefully you have a wonderful holiday season. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. The spice must flow. And always wash your socks.